why should the Indian Navy be bothered about Gulf of Aden, which is, say, 1,500 nautical miles away? Simply because more than $130 billion of our annual trade comes through the Gulf of Aden. Okay, thank you for the kind introduction, Srikanth. I must let you all know that one of the secrets that Kesnoor held behind was that he's my PhD guide. So much for that. Now, the other thing is that when I got the first call from Srikanth to say that could I address the Ajit Knowledge Forum, I did not understand the mammothness of this event. I'm truly impressed by the way that you all have gone about it. I must compliment the ex-students of Bijapur for having conceptualized such a forum and set it up. And the list of luminaries who have addressed this gathering is truly, inspiring, to say the least. Okay, now the topic given to me. Just hang on a minute. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so the topic given to me is safeguarding India's maritime frontiers, challenges and strategies. So I've been given about 40 to 45 minutes, and I'll try and do justice to that, but I must put in a caveat here. Maritime security is a vast subject. I mean, as vast as the oceans themselves. So it might not be possible for me to cover the entire, gamut of what happens under the ambit of maritime security. But I'll be happy to take on any questions that any of you have at the end of what I have to say. Okay, this is how I intend covering it. Peculiarities of the IOR, the maritime character, complications of the seas, because it's quite complicated. It's very unlike land. Maritime threats, challenges, and what are the repercussions of failure to ensure maritime security. Let me touch upon peculiarities of the IOR. Now, as you all are aware, the Indian Ocean is the only ocean named after a country. And not only that, Indian Ocean, unlike the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, is a closed ocean from the top. As a result, entry into or exit out of the Indian Ocean is through choke points. I've put in the choke points on the slide, as you can see. On the west of India, you've got the Cape of Good Hope, well to the south, the Mozambique Channel, the Gulf of Aden, which leads to Bab el-Mandeb and up to Suez Canal. You've got the Strait of Hormuz, which leads into Persian Gulf. And on to our east, you've got the Straits of Malacca, the world famous and probably the busiest in the world. The Sunda Strait, which is between Sumatra and Java in Indonesia. The Lombok Strait further east of Sunda, and the Ombai-Wetar Strait further east of Lombok. So these few choke points are the ones which provide entry into and exit out of the Indian Ocean region. Now, let me add some more details. The economic importance of these vital choke points is because over 60% of our world's oil shipments go through the international shipping lanes of the Indian Ocean region. 1/3 of world's bulk cargo, 70% of world's container traffic, all of that go through these ISLs. And one peculiarity of this is that 3/4 of the trade that happens through the international shipping lanes here is external to the ISR. Therefore, the choke points are so important. Now, let me touch upon our maritime character. If you look at India, it juts out nearly 1,000 nautical miles into the sea from the coastline above. And the length of the coastline, you would have read and seen at a lot of places, it is mentioned at 7,500 or thereabouts. In fact, more scientific ways of measuring it have now revealed that the length of the coastline is 11,084 kilometers. It is soon to be promulgated. The final steps are now being taken. There was also an endeavor undertaken to exactly count the number of islands that the country has, and the number that has arrived at is 1389, which is mainly in two clusters, Lakshadweep and Minicoy to our west, which is circled in blue on the slide, and the Andamans and Nicobars, which is further to the east. Now, what are our maritime interests? What is it that we need to protect? Srikanth brought out the fact that 95% of our trade is through the seas. If you look at globally, if you went through the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development annual report, 80% of global trade is maritime in nature. So there is this inextricable link between maritime security and national GDPs, and especially so of India, which has got 95% of our trade through the seas. 80% of our energy sources come through the seas as well. It's either through imports or through offshore development areas. So for oil and natural gas, we are totally dependent upon maritime security. As I said, offshore oil production, Kestu mentioned about 2.1 billion square kilometers of EEZ that we have. This is the area from which all the resources, whether living or dead, is for us to exploit. And 61% of our domestic production, petroleum production, is from these offshore oil fields, which are mainly Mumbai High and the Krishna Godavari basin to the east. Now, so I just want to put this out. We take a lot of things for granted. When you go to a petrol pump, I particularly put the slide up for you to understand. And suppose you find this notice put up there. Fuel is unavailable at the moment. And this lasts for, say, 3 days. Imagine if it were to last for 3 months or, say, 3 years. You can imagine what happens to normal life and the society in general. So that's the effect, lack of maritime security can put up. Fisheries is another huge area of maritime interest for the nation. It is mainly also because 1.7% of our GDP is contributed by the fishing sector. And our exports has kind of been growing at such a rapid pace. About 64,000 crores of annual exports is from our country. Now, you also see that market-wise export, the kind of value that is there. This 43,000 is of 2021. And as I mentioned, it has been galloping. It is now 64,000. And I've just briefly put across what kind of exports of fisheries happens to various countries. 12 major ports and about 230 odd. I've said about 200 non-major ports. It's actually well over 200. It's about 239 non-major ports. The difference is that major ports are controlled by the center, which is under the central government, and the 200 non-major ports is controlled by the states. And these ports are economic gateways of the country, because if 95% of our trade is through the ports, you'll realize that how these are actually the economic gateways of the country. I've just put out statistics. All that would need to interest you is that 474.96 million metric tons of cargo is handled in our ports. And each of these ports, I've also just put out as to what do they mainly handle. I mean, this is just for information for you. International shipping lanes, and these are the ones which take ships from ports to the choke points and to their final destinations. And as I mentioned, more than nearly 70% is actually external. So all of them lead from ports to the choke points in the Indian Ocean region and beyond. And these are truly our economic lifelines. And these lines that you see and the color coding that you see is because of the number of ships which are there. Per annum, in a year, the Indian Ocean international shipping lanes see about 130,000 ships. And you now have the IMAC, which puts out Information Management and Analysis Center of the Navy, which puts out a monthly maritime security update. And as per that, every month, at any given day, the average number of ships in the Indian Ocean region is about 30,000. Okay. The other thing is this, our crude oil imports. I mentioned as to how vast majority of our energy requirements are actually imported from abroad. And this is just the percentage of our energy imports. The other one that I want to put across here is our diaspora. If you see, we've got about 2.29% of our population living abroad, and 1.49 actually within the IOR region itself. And why is this so important and a maritime interest to us? Because every time there is a problem, like we faced during COVID, if there is a requirement for our Indians to come back to the country, or if there is a political instability in some certain countries and our Indians have to be evacuated, that becomes a maritime interest as well. And this diaspora, there is also 87 billion USD of contribution that comes into our GDP, which comes to about 2.7% of the GDP. One more information for you all. The International Seabed Authority allocates areas for polymetallic nodules and polymetallic sulfides exploration for various countries. And these are the two areas which are far away. I mean, you'll see the distances are mentioned there. The southern one is 4,000 kilometers away from us. And these areas need to be protected as well, because they belong to us for exploration for polymetallic nodules and sulfides. The other less known fact is this, that 99% of communication, global communication, is through submarine cables, which goes through the seas. And all your financial transactions and so many other things, your internet, all of them depend on the safety and security of this underwater cables, which carry 98%. Now, I want to briefly touch upon the complications of the maritime domain. This again is very less understood by people who are not dealing with the maritime domain. If you see, we've got the concept of global commons. What does that mean? It just means that anybody is allowed to be anywhere in the sea. It does not matter which nation you belong to, which nation you're coming from, and which nation you're headed to. The United Nations Convention on the Loss of Seas that came out in 1982 gave away certain areas to nations for exploiting. 12 nautical miles, which is roughly about 23 kilometers, is the territorial waters from any country. Contiguous zone is about 24 nautical miles, where your customs and financial rules apply. Exclusive economic zone goes up to 200 nautical miles. Despite all this, what is territorial waters? Your sovereignty applies. All your law applies in these waters, but not in the rest of them. And even in territorial waters, anybody can pass through, which is called the innocent passage. Anyone can take passage through those waters. When it comes to the rest of it, anybody can be anywhere. That kind of complicates it. Now, to explain this, if you were to leave on a ship from, say, Mumbai Harbor or Cochin or New Mangalore, what happens is that in about half an hour or 45 minutes, you would have crossed the territorial waters. And it is highly possible you will run into warships of any nation from across the world. And they're legally allowed to be there. So it is not illegal to be there. So this is one complication that one needs to realize. Now, in all this, why should we be worried? The primary job of any navy or any maritime force really is to win a maritime war when deterrence fails. In fact, the primary job is deterrence. You be as strong as possible so that nobody dares to come to fight with you. But in case that fails, we have to win the next maritime battle. However, the bigger threat and the more common threat is the 24/7 subconventional threat. I'll brief about it subsequently. Now, so navies, as I said, ensure peace by being fully prepared for war. And these are some pictures that I put out as to how they fully prepare, which is a day-to-day thing for the navies. When it comes to 24/7 conventional threats, I mean, this is something that is present 24/7, 365 days out there at sea. First one is piracy. I'm sure you all have heard of Gulf of Aden and as to how pirates are playing havoc. Quite often, you're kind of questioned as to why should the Indian Navy be bothered about Gulf of Aden, which is, say, 1,500 nautical miles away. Simply because more than $130 billion of our annual trade comes through the Gulf of Aden. So we cannot sit and watch pirates make hay. Now, so because of that, in the Gulf of Aden, the Indian Navy has deployed a warship since October of 2008, continuously present there, being replaced by another ship if one ship has to come back. And this has led to a lot of escorts. Currently, it is not an escort operation which is undertaken. Its very presence actually prevents pirates from acting funny. Now, the Indian Navy and Coast Guard combined in 2010 launched one of the most successful piracy operations ever undertaken, I think, across the world anyway. What happened was that the pirates from the Gulf of Aden had moved well east. And in fact, four of the pirates were actually arrested from one of the beaches in the Lakshadweep Islands. So that is when the seriousness had to be addressed, and Op Island was launched. And the Navy and the Coast Guard ended up arresting 119 pirates. And they were in the jails in Mumbai before they were kind of handed over back to the elders in Somalia for them to be tried. Important of Hormuz, two-thirds of India's oil, as you all are aware, comes through through the strait, and half of India's natural gas comes from there. So as a result, if there's any threat or instability in that region, it bothers us. And what happened? The Indian Navy launched something called the Ops Sankalp. This was launched in early 2019. This is to ensure safe passage of trade coming to India, and Indian flagged ships, even if they're not carrying trade to India, to pass safely this side and that side of Strait of Hormuz. And they've been escorted by special forces for quite some time. Now that has stopped, but as and when, it's like a sinusoidal curve, when it goes up and comes down, this escort will continue. The other big threat that Kestoor also spoke about is maritime terrorism. 2611, as you all remember, happened in 2008 when Ajmal Kasab and his group of personnel came in through the sea route, through a boat, captured an Indian fishing boat, got into that, chopped the heads of the crew, and then came into Mumbai and did what they did. And this actually was truly the birth of coastal security. And what happened? There are a number of actions which were taken. One of them was to set up coastal radar network all along our coast, whether it is mainland on both sides of the island. We also created something called the IMAC, Information Management and Analysis Center, the picture that you see in your right bottom corner of the slide. So this is at Gurugram, which collates all the pictures. In addition to the radar network, we also have a national AIS chain. We've got ships and aircrafts deployed regularly, in fact, on a daily basis, and they all contribute the picture as well. There's a space-based, satellite-based global AIS picture which comes in. There's something called a long-range information and tracking from all the merchant ships which are there out at sea. All of them are collated, and if you look at the screen, the bottom right picture, next to India, you find those white dots. These are all ships that are plying along the ISLs. The other thing that happened was a three-layered coastal security concept, which had the Navy in the outer layer, Coast Guard closer to the coast, and Marine Police much closer to the coast, and trying maritime legal issues, staying on the coast. And maritime terrorism also opened our eyes towards offshore security and defense. And so there are a number of assets today which are regularly deployed to ensure offshore security. In fact, Admiral Purandare, who's here, he was the flag officer offshore defense advisory group, whose responsibility was to ensure the security of offshore assets like this. Gun running is the other threat. I mean, and that happens, in plenty in our waters. And this uses the legal loopholes that are present, because you cannot carry guns if you're not in territorial waters of somebody. If you catch somebody with arms and ammunition, that's perfectly legal to be there. So they exploit that. And all this and the next slide, which is drugs, end up also supporting terrorism. As you're aware, drug flows from somewhere off the Makaran coast along lightly patrolled areas of the Omani coast beyond their territorial waters, and then comes down to the east coast of Africa, which funds terrorist groups like Al-Shabaab and so on and so forth. The other threat is environmental degradation, because of which, cyclones, the numbers and the severity have only gone up. I've just put in some examples, whether it was Kerala floods of 2018, whether it was cyclone of Oki of Kerala, and the Lakshadweep Islands, which was devastated by Oki. There was a cyclone which hit Socotra, and I think 32 or 38 fishermen, their boats capsized and were stuck in Socotra. Were brought back to India by the Navy. And Cyclone Mora in Bangladesh. So in all these instances, Mozambique, Cyclone Idai, and there are a number of examples that I can give you. Indian Navy has by and large been the first responder entering into the country, literally following in the wake of the cyclone to provide relief for these people. Now, the other role that the navies have is a diplomatic role. Now, this is very important because navies are best suited for this role. As I mentioned, if you once you leave a harbor, you are into international waters in no time, and therefore you're the best suited, and you operate in global commerce and sustenance and personality. You can remain off a country, staying beyond, say, territorial waters, 12 nautical miles, and you can remain there forever if supported by a tanker to give you adequate fuel. So sustenance and versatility because every naval ship not only can fire a missile, but can also provide HADR. So the versatility extends through a wide range of operations. Now, two things that I would like to mention here. One is the Honorable Prime Minister's vision of SAGAR, security and growth for all in the region. Now, why security and growth for all in the region? Basically, because it is a clear realization that non-traditional threats to maritime security are transnational in nature. So if it is a cyclone, it could hit Maldives, Sri Lanka, and India all at the same time. Similarly, it's a drug peddling case. By a minor alteration of course, you could come land either in Maldives or in Sri Lanka or in India. And so on and so forth. So there are many examples that I can give. But so Prime Minister announced this vision in 2015 and security and growth for all in the region. And the Prime Minister also chaired a United Nations Security Council open discussion on maritime security, a case for international cooperation. So there are a number of facts that came out of this too. And this vision of SAGAR is the one in which Indian Navy and the Coast Guard base their foreign cooperation engines. And there are a number of them. For instance, the Indian Navy launched something called the IONS, Indian Ocean Naval Symposium. It's an Indian Naval Initiative of 2008. And currently there are 25 members and 8 observers. 8 observers who are external to Indian Ocean, including China is a member of IONS. And in addition to that, we also carry, I just wanted to mention that the right hand picture is the 10th anniversary of ION, which happened in 2018 at Cochin, where all the members and observers were present. The other thing that the Indian Navy does is the joint, and the Coast Guard actually does, is the joint EEZ patrol with a number of countries in our region. As I mentioned, not everybody has the capability and the capacity to patrol the vast EEZ that they have. So as a result, the Indian Navy provides help to them to ensure that non-traditional threats to maritime security do not bother them. Coordinated patrols with the countries that we share an international maritime boundary with, we carry out CORPATs, or coordinated patrols. This is basically to enhance mutual confidence. We do it with Bangladesh, with Myanmar, with Thailand, and with Indonesia, all in the Bay of Bengal. We've also launched an information fusion center. Now, the picture that you see on the right of the slide is the IMAC, which I had showed you earlier as well. But with this, there is also an IFC IOR, Information Fusion Center, Indian Ocean region. Now, what this does is to collate a maritime domainers awareness picture, because this is quite often the first step towards ensuring maritime security, and for which, as I said, it's not possible for you to do it all alone. So this is just getting together with all countries which are in the region, get their picture as well, and put up what is called the consolidated maritime domain awareness picture. And this picture is shared with all our partners as well. And this place has also got international liaison officers, whether it is US, France, Singapore, Japan, and our immediate maritime neighbors, all of them are represented in the IFC IOR. There are numerous multilateral and bilateral exercises that we do, which enhances mutual understanding and promotes interoperability. And this is very regular. In fact, last year in 22 alone, I think something like 60 bilateral exercises and 12 multilateral exercises we did with various ones. Obviously, you're aware of Malabar that we do with the 4 Quad countries. And in addition to that, we did the first ever India-ASEAN maritime exercise. We have a trilateral with Singapore and Thailand. We did a trilateral with Australia and Indonesia. So there are a number of bilateral and multilateral maritime exercises that we do. Okay. Now, so now let me start. I think I'm already at 6:42. So let me start telling you what are the challenges which are faced. Now, the challenges that we face are, first is the multi-agency nature of maritime security. Again, Commodore Kesnu touched upon this. Uh, if you actually look at it, the number of ministries which are involved in the center is huge, because you got the MOD, which itself is now split up into DMA and DOD. The Navy under the DMA, the Coast Guard under the DOD. You got the Marine Police, which is a state subject. And you've got coastal security being actually addressed by the Ministry of Home Affairs, because based on one of the recommendations post-Kargil, there was a Department of Border Management, which was created in the Ministry of Home Affairs, which is responsible for coastal security. And then you've got BSF, which has got a water wing, where we've got international boundary lines with Pakistan on the west and with Bangladesh on the east. The BSF has a water wing. We've got customs, which has got a marine wing. We've got the Narcotics Control Bureau. We've got the Department of Revenue Intelligence. We've got port security, and for port security, you've got the CISF, which looks after major ports. You got the SISF, which looks after minor ports and states. And where SISF is not there, it is private security. So the number of agencies which look after maritime security is huge. If you look at offshore security, for example, there is a responsibility for the operator. There is a responsibility for the Coast Guard, which is responsible for offshore security. And there's a responsibility for the Navy, which is responsible for offshore defense, if there's a terrorist threat. So this is one major challenge that we have. And now with the creation of National Maritime Security Coordinator, what I've done is to create a multi-lab agency structure called the MAMSG, Multi-Agency Maritime Security Group. When the National Maritime Security Coordinator got created, I recall in the initial comments, the police officer was telling me as to how he dealt with coastal security for some time. He'll be happy to know that now we have one state maritime security coordinator in each of the coastal state and union territory. And he's called the SMSC. So not only is he in the police organization of the state, but also reports to the National Maritime Security Coordinator in the subject of maritime security. So in the MAMSG, which was created, Multi-Agency Maritime Security Group, that is there is a MAMSG policy which meets once every quarter, in which all the central ministries and all the state maritime security coordinators of the 9 coastal states and 4 coastal union territories, 13 of them total, attend. We also have other structures to enhance multi-agency coordination. So this is one huge step that the government took, and I think it is paying its dividends. Vastness of the seas, as I told you, is the other challenge that can be there, because you cannot calculate area of the sea into the number of units that you require to patrol them. That's not possible. So it has got to be prioritized. It has got to be analyzed as to where the threat is, vastness of the seas can be a massive challenge. Politically uncontrolled areas. This I've mentioned in the global commons concept, that seas are politically uncontrolled. You could have EEZ from where you can actually get the resources, but that does not mean it kind of belongs to you. So that is one thing that we've got to be careful. The next, sea is a crowded space. I told you about any given time, 30,000 ships, and these are actually above 300 tons. There are a number of them which are below 300 tons. Fishing boats. India alone has nearly 3 lakh fishing boats which are registered, which go out to sea. So when you, from say in the middle of Arabian Sea or Bay of Bengal, if you start moving towards the Indian coastline, you will find the crowd of contacts which are there out at sea on the rise. And closer to the coast, it's phenomenally high. So ensuring coastal security can be a huge challenge. Rules versus freedom of navigation. Because quite often there are certain rules which are made, do this, don't do this. UNCLOS have certain rules as well. But the unfortunate part is that has got to keep in mind the concept of freedom of navigation. Again, born out of the concept of global commons. So there are a lot of things which you think, this guy can actually take advantage of in creating a problem for you, but yet that concept of freedom of navigation that he enjoys can always challenge your security. Politics, I've just left it at that because, as I mentioned, because we have the global commons trying to ensure maritime security, and because we are all in it together, the concept of SAGAR, security and growth for all in the region. So local politics or change of regimes in some other countries could also impact upon your own ability to ensure maritime security. You all probably are as aware as I am what's happening between Maldives and us. So this can be a challenge. Okay, but yet it is we are kind of ever ready for the call of duty. I just give these few examples: Samudra Setu and Sagar and Samudra Setu 2. These are all during the COVID times. As to how I mentioned about Indian diaspora wanting to come back, so they were kind of brought back or taken brought back to India, and also our help in providing medicines and rations and things like that to various countries around in the Indian Ocean region was huge, and it was a huge challenge. Okay, now how does the Indian Navy do all this? Is through the concept of mission-based deployments, which started on the 1st of July 2017. Since then, the Navy has gone into a concept of mission-based deployments, and there are these identified places across the Indian Ocean region where the Navy almost continuously deploys its warships. Some places where it's continuous, like for example, Gulf of Aden, I mentioned to you, since October of 2008, we've been there. Of Sankalp that I told you in the Strait of Hormuz, the Navy continues to be there. And as situation keeps changing, there'll be more and more ships. Currently, the ongoing issue between issue that the shipping faces in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden because of Houthis and the attacks on them. The number of ships which are deployed there obviously has gone up. We also on the east have a Malacca deployment, or the Maldep, it's called, which is continuous, and so on. You can see on the chart that the mission-based deployments has really helped us on a number of measures. One is to ensure your presence. That actually helps you in collating a maritime domain awareness picture of the region. Second, to respond as quickly as possible to any developing situation, and also to undertake foreign cooperation endeavors. Now, so in case I mentioned about the importance of maritime security, now what happens if maritime security is threatened on a single day, has just been shown here in one small slide. If you look at Strait of Hormuz, if there is a maritime security incident which prevents your ships from coming in and going back, $423 million per day will be the loss that the country will have. This figure that has been put down at the bottom of 1.3 billion USD per day. Obviously, if there's no maritime security anywhere around, that might be too much to kind of expect. But yet, if you look at, say, for example, to the east, Sunda, Lombok, and Malacca, it's 517 million USD per day is the kind of trade that comes through there. So there are a number of adverse effects on balance of payments, and whole lot of things. I mean, you can see on the bottom corner of the slide, and inflation, loss of jobs, shortage of raw materials, commodities. So the economy essentially will come to a grinding halt if maritime security is not ensured. So this is my final slide. All that I would like to say is maritime security is equal to national prosperity. And if that's not ensured, any country can come down to its knees. Okay. Okay, with that, I'll stop. I think I've taken about 40 minutes, and I'm happy to take on any questions that you have.